Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof for the 9th of May 2025. Not too much to report today because this, Russian dictated truce has actually functionally been in place. So, although there is still activity along the front lines, I don't think that's particularly changed. The Ukrainians haven't been throwing drones into Russia, and Russia haven't been throwing drones into Ukraine. And actually, although Ukraine called it kind of pathetic or whatever, really called out the truce declaration from Putin, they're caught in a bit of between a rock and a hard place, because if they continue to hammer Russia with drones and missiles, then the international community is going to look at Russia as being the ones more interested in peace. This is about an audience of one, really, an audience of the US. And they want to be seen to, the Ukrainians want to be seen to be desiring peace. They want this 30-day truce, 30-day ceasefire, rather than the 3-day one. And they said 3 days is rubbish. How about 30 days? And Putin turned down the 30 days. And that gives Ukraine the kind of moral political high ground. However, if they then start hammering Russia during that 3-day truce, it takes that away and makes Ukraine not look like they're interested in peace, and that gives Putin a win. So Putin was always in the driving seat, I think, with regard to dictating a 3-day truce, and he can kind of go around and say, right, we demand a truce when it's convenient for us, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, Ukraine sort of took advantage of that situation and did some psyops and said, hey, we can't promise that there aren't going to be some explosions in Moscow at the time of the Victory Day parade. But like I said before, they were psyops. They were clearly never going to actually strike there because you've got too many foreign dignitaries there. And given that there are 35 foreign ministers from around Europe and etc. in Kiev at the moment, celebrating the same sort of thing, Victory in Europe Day, and etc. If the Ukrainians hammered the Russians would hammer the Ukrainians, and actually, foreign ministers from 35 different countries is pretty impressive, and actually more of a target. Well, I mean, in Moscow you do have Xi Jinping, you've got Vucic and Fico, although I don't know if they're at the actual parade or just doing wreath laying. Nonetheless, it is too risky to do any kind of strikes on Moscow while that is taking place. So the Ukrainians, I think, were clever in ramping up expectations and hammering the crap out of Moscow for 3 or 4 days beforehand, causing absolute travel chaos, closing down the airports. That was all very sensible. And then stopping for the actual kind of truce. We'll see if after the end of the truce they will just hammer the crap out of Moscow again, or were they stockpiling for that? It's going to be interesting to see how that all develops afterwards. But certainly along the front lines, things seem to be a little quieter along the front lines. As in, I don't think there are so many, big missiles and strikes taking place, but there is frontline activity, as you can see from this Ukrainian General Staff sheet. These are the Russian losses for the day before. Again, all the caveats, as ever, are in the description to the video linked below. 1,300 personnel lost in a day is pretty significant. Slight uptick from where we've seen in the last few days. 4 tanks, 4 troop-carrying AFVs, pretty low in those categories. 36 artillery systems is actually, even though it's 1.5 times the daily average and a little bit, it is still lower than we have seen it. So we're used to 50, 60, 70 even at the moment in that category, but still not insignificant. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and 120 vehicles and fuel tanks. Interesting, there are 39 drones listed up there. I wonder what they are. Sometimes they have reconnaissance drones they put in there. That could be from, I'm not quite sure when that would be from, or what that pertains to, whether there were any Shaheds sent. But as you can see, 39 is far fewer than we have seen. And indeed, I have no news of any strikes either from Ukraine or from Russia, but 120 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's again fairly typically high. Not as high as we've seen it, but over 100 is pretty significant. Now, only a couple of videos really to show you and to reference. Here's one that shows how despicable the Russians are, that they continue to do these war crimes. Russia films its own war crimes and feels nothing, says UA Voyager. This FPV drone footage shows a Russian operator deliberately hunting down a civilian woman near Dobropilya in the Donetsk region. How many more war crimes will it take before the world stops tolerating this evil? Well, we don't tolerate it, but, what are we doing about it? It is disgusting. There's no doubt about that. And this is so commonplace amongst the Russians, isn't it? It's that human safari, as they call it. Now, Tim White here says, I don't usually post frontline close combat stuff, but this is good. Ukraine says 3 intelligence officers on a sabotage mission in Zaporizhia were gassed and then taken captive. However, their captors were tracked by FPV drones, which then successfully attacked to release their comrades. Now, you can't see the exact details here of what's going on. You do see them tracking some Russians, and one of them even gets under this vehicle, and then they send an FPV drone into that. So it's all spotted by this reconnaissance drone. Interesting stuff if that is indeed what took place, and that's the second time we have, again, if this is accurate, second time that we've evidenced Ukrainian prisoners of war being released or being, I'd say extracted, but they're not. There's a mission using drones to free the POWs who then escape. I don't know the outcome here in granular detail, but a previous one, there were some POWs being moved along by the Russian troops, and then the FPV drones hit the Russian troops, and the POWs were able to escape. So that's pretty good stuff for the Ukrainians there. Russian soldiers report missile strikes in the border village of Glushkovo in the Kursk region. So this is potentially the Ukrainians during the truce time hitting Glushkovo, almost certainly a military site there. In fact, I think this guy recording is a soldier. 2 videos have been published showing the damage. In the second, in a 5-story building, there's a hit on what may be the local office of Russia's Interior Ministry. Glushkovo is just on the same river. If you know, it's basically that area that they're trying to get into at the moment in Tetkino, and potentially move as far as Glushkovo. Interesting that they are doing strikes on Glushkovo, which would suggest kind of shaping operations potentially. In this video, says Tim White, and a second one, the person filming, who must be military, says 2 missiles hit Glushkovo at exactly noon. He describes the debris from a 5-story building scattered around. It may have been used by troops, and near the end of the video, sounds of potential ammo explosions as well. So that could have been a useful strike. Don't know the finer details though. Zelenskyy, says Tim White, ordered the army to only fire if they are fired upon during Putin's pseudo ceasefire. I know this has not been popular with a lot of soldiers at the front. I don't like the decision, but we don't know how much pressure Ukraine's president was under from the US and its allies. I think, as I said earlier, they were caught between a rock and a hard place. Would all like them to continue hammering the Russians, of course, but the PR for that, the optics for that would be, I think, pretty problematic. Now, Russian ballistic missiles make April the deadliest month for Ukrainian civilians since last autumn, says the UN. At least 19 children were killed. It's a staggering statistic there. 19 children killed and 78 injured in April, the highest verified monthly number of child casualties since June 2022. So April was the worst month for Ukrainian children being killed since really, really early on in the war. And that is horrific. And ballistic missiles are finding their mark and killing civilians and killing children. Speaking of civilians, so Sumy was hit again yesterday, the city and surrounding area, I believe. It's had quite a bit of attention over the last week, as it often does have anyway. It's close to the border. It is somewhere where the Russians, I think, are trying to get to as they come down south from their areas. Well, not from there. The areas where the Ukrainians had attacked into Kursk, the Russians are now sort of counter-attacking, and in one place they've got south of the border and are moving sort of slowly towards Kursk. I don't know that they're going to get particularly far. It's quite difficult terrain there, but they are in range of so many towns, so many villages north of Sumy that they can just hammer with artillery from across the border. Here, Michael McKay says Russians did this. Elderly Ukrainians are cared for after they were driven from their lifelong homes in the Sumy region. So some of these villages are being evacuated, with these elderly people being rehomed. And of course, you know, it's so difficult for them where you've lived possibly in a village and in that house maybe for generations, right? And maybe 50 years you spent there, and then you're suddenly having to get up sticks and go at the age of sort of 85 or something. You know, what have you got to go to? Who do you know? What infrastructure is there for you? What familial support? Sometimes none. And then you're sort of homeless, moved to maybe Sumy city, maybe further afield, and that sort of lack of connection to where you are and those around you must be psychologically pretty challenging. Okay, results of another, so this is going back a few days now. Cyber Baroshna, as I've mentioned previously, often come out with satellite imagery analyses of battle damage. They say the results of another strike on the Shaikovka Strategic Aviation Airfield, destruction of the technical room for maintenance and preparation of Kh-22 missiles, fires in the area of the airfield fuel station, and damage and burning of fuel tanks. So that's all good news, just a bit more meat on the bone for what took place at that particular airfield. I think it was a night when a couple of airfields were hit. Was it about 3 nights ago now? Now, interesting claim here from a Japanese OSINT researcher, open source intelligence researcher, AS22, reports on Twitter that Russian forces are deploying decoy S-300s and S-400s air defense systems in the Far East to replace actual units redeployed to the European Russia in an effort to keep up the appearance of a strong air defense presence in the region. So we know historically the Russians have actually had their Chinese borders and areas near Japan. They've got issues with the Kuril Islands north of Japan, where they control those islands. Japan think that they are Japan's, and it's a bone of contention. So the Russians have traditionally had a lot of air defense lined up along the Chinese border and over towards the east. But actually Ukraine, I mean, look at how massive Russia is, right? It's all happening around Ukraine. Then Moscow is threatened by the Ukrainians. They actually throw a whole host of drones into Moscow over a 3-day period, and the Russians panic and bring as many air defense pieces as they can back towards the center of back towards Moscow. But actually this has been happening for an awful long time now. They've been pulling their air defenses away from these areas that they don't really need them so much at the moment, but they don't want to show. I mean, they're there for a reason, right? And they are acting as a deterrent, as a statement to the neighboring countries. So they can't just take them away and then leave the areas with nothing, because that sends a signal that Russia are particularly weak. So what they are doing is placing a number of decoy S-300s and S-400s in the place of the actual air defenses that they are moving. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces now. We are going to go to a little bit of news of Ukrainian manoeuvres. The Ukrainians, says this Russian source that calls them the Crests, the Ukrainians landed on the left bank of the Dnipro. So remember, the Dnipro River is coming from north to south, and the compass directions of a river are not the compass directions. The directions, the left or right bank of a river, essentially are from the point of view of the direction of the water flow in a river. So if it's going from north to south, the left bank is actually on the right if you're looking at a northerly oriented map. So it gets rather confusing. So the left bank of the Dnipro is, as we look at the river, on the right hand side of the river. But anyway, it's the occupied Russian side. So the Ukrainians have landed on the occupied Russian side of the Dnipro River in the Kherson region of Russia. Fierce fighting is currently underway at the landing site, with the Ukrainian armed forces using drones, artillery and aircraft. Our forces are responding, so the Russian forces are responding, striking at enemy firing points on the right bank. So there's been a lot of talk about the Russians getting ready to attack across the river, amassing 300 boats in the area. There is apparently news that the Ukrainians are across the river, and it could well be in the Antonivsky Bridge direction. So this is, if I remember correctly, and I haven't looked at this, but I'm pretty sure that's called dacha, like the sort of dacha, suburban, sort of almost rural cottage housing, that often called dachas. But anyway, this whole place is called dacha, I think. Ukrainian militants reportedly landed on the left bank of the Dnipro in Kherson. Fierce fighting underway at the landing sites, as was previously mentioned. So it could well be there. Now, for the first time in history, Ukraine's SPU, the SBU, has uncovered a Hungarian spy network operating in Zakarpattia. So Zakarpattia is to the southwest of Ukraine, bordering Hungary. And there are quite a lot of sort of not diaspora Hungarian communities, but these Carpathian Hungarian descended communities that live there. And that's often what you hear Orban talk about when he's like, I want rights for people, etc., etc. Well, here we are hearing that SBU has uncovered a Hungarian spy network operating there. Agents from Hungary's military intelligence were caught gathering info on local defences and public sentiment in case of military deployment. 2 suspects, ex-military, face life for treason. Okay, interesting. Then we hear that the Russian government's deficit is now even worse than the catastrophic year of COVID, says Jay in Kyiv. That 2024, 2025 there, so that's the bright red one, is looking worse than all the other years preceding 21, 22, 2021, 22, 23 and 24. It's looking pretty challenging, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes after this month. There are some claims that they have ramped up projections, and they're tripling their deficit going forward. So it's a real economically challenging time for Russia. It's exactly why I've been long saying that the US should, the new government, the Trump government, as it turns out to have been, on January the 20th, should have just hammered Russia with a suite of sanctions, and then these numbers would have been even worse. I mean, they honestly, the screws need to be turned, and I think Russia was on the verge of some serious issues 3 months ago, and actually the foot was lifted off their neck and they've been able to breathe more easily. Well, actually, those long-term economic woes are not something that you can easily turn around, and they are particularly biting. And this is why it makes me happy to say that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced the largest ever sanctions package against Russia, targeting 100 tankers or so of its shadow fleet that shipped $24 billion in oil since 2024. Keir Starmer, with the correct rhetoric, says the threat Russia poses to our national security cannot be underestimated. To ramp up the pressure on Putin, I'm announcing the largest package of sanctions yet. I will always do what it takes to safeguard working people, security at home, strength abroad. Brilliant stuff. Well said. I'd love to see that from the United States of America. I really, really would. Reuters is stating that the US and Russia, on the other hand, this is the move that the US is doing. US and Russia are secretly discussing resuming Russian gas flows to Europe after a potential peace deal with Ukraine. Sources say the talks could give Washington leverage over volumes, while Gazprom is reportedly ready to offer 2-year contracts. Russia and the US explore ways to restore Russian gas flows to Europe, sources say, and that would just be so counterproductive as far as I am concerned. Crazy. Okay, so run away or ramp up military aid. asks, Noel reports, Vice President JD Vance responded, "We'll see what happens." So let's listen to JD Vance on a bit of sort of peace negotiations and relations with Russia.
Today, you spoke with the Munich Security Conference here in D.C.
Yeah.
You said that Russia is essentially asking for too much in a deal to settle the war with Ukraine. So what do we do now? Do we walk away from this situation, or is it time to ramp up our military support for Ukraine?
Well, we'll see what happens, of course. But look, we knew that Russia would ask for
We'll
too
see
much
what
because
happens.
the Russian perception of the war is on the ground. They're winning. And of course, the Ukrainians would like to do a ceasefire, in part because things have not been going so well for the Ukrainians the last few months. And our attitude is we don't want Ukraine to collapse. We obviously want Ukraine to remain a sovereign country, but Russia can't.
And I'm going to stop it there because there's a really important point. I have been saying, I asked this to Greg and Jonathan Fink the other night, and they didn't seem to agree. But I don't know whether Ukraine actually do really want a ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire, because actually they are on the edge at the moment. I think things are really troubling on the Eastern Front around Touretsk to Pokrovsk area and south of Pokrovsk to Kharkova and the Velika Novosilka areas. They're also struggling in the Liman direction near Terny and Torska. And I get a sense that Ukraine is going around saying, look, we really do want a 30-day ceasefire. I don't think it's a kind of psyops trying to trying to prompt Russia into looking like they're not interested in. I think there is that as well. So, every time Russia denies a ceasefire, then it makes Russia look like they're the bad guys. So I think that's going on as well. But I also think Ukraine might need a little bit of a respite because they are struggling at the moment. And actually, that's what JD Vance says. So no matter what you think about JD Vance, he is going to be getting some kind of intelligence briefings and paying more attention to them probably than Donald Trump. So when he says they've been struggling for the last couple of months and they want a ceasefire, and that's why they're calling for the 30-day ceasefire, I think there might be an element of truth in there.
Perception of the war is on the ground. They're winning.
So he's very careful to say the Russian perception, as in the perception, not necessarily the reality. So the Russian perception on the ground is that they're winning. Okay, I'm not sure I disagree with that. Like, as in, Russians will tell you that they're winning and it's all going okay. And when you start listening to some of the anecdotes coming from the actual troops on the front line, it's a slightly different appraisal. But and they are their scare quotes winning is coming at a massive cost. But I think the Ukrainians are hurting as well.
And of course, the Ukrainians would like to do a ceasefire, in part because things have not been going so well for the Ukrainians the last few months. And our attitude is we don't want Ukraine to collapse. We obviously want Ukraine to remain a sovereign country, but Russia can't expect to be given territory that they haven't even conquered yet.
Now, this is the sentence I most wanted to talk to you about. So they can't be expected to make a claim on territory they haven't conquered yet. It's not so much that, it's the inverse of that. So when you say they can't expect to stake a claim to the territory they haven't conquered, so part of the Donbass, the rest of Kherson and the rest of Zaporizhia, they're not justified in claiming that. Now, that's one of the stipulations that the Russians have put in, that they want all four of those oblasts as well as Crimea. So he's saying they can't realistically claim those areas they haven't yet conquered. But what he's implying is they can justifiably stake a claim to the places that they have conquered. That is insanely dangerous in my book. And honestly, concentrate on the little things and how people phrase stuff. This, I think, is deeply problematic for Ukraine. And it shows that JD Vance, for one, is fine with giving away the areas that they have conquered, in his own words, conquered.
We obviously want Ukraine to remain a sovereign country, but Russia can't expect to be given territory that they haven't even conquered yet.
Can't expect to be given. Literally, you can't be given this territory that you haven't yet conquered. which means you can be given, or it can come to mean, you can be given the territory you have conquered. That's what I mean, not only can we infer that from what he's saying, but actually that's broadly in line with what he said previously, which is they're going to have to make concessions. And that has been, like Steve Witkoff's position is exactly that. You know, the quickest way to end this is giving Russia those territories that they've conquered, which is then to justify aggressive attacks into sovereign territories, sovereign nations, to take control and conquer territory. You'll be given that territory kind of legally, de jure. You'll be given that if you are stronger and it's too much effort for us to do anything about it. So China, help yourself to Taiwan. In fact, any strong nation can go. In fact, the US can then help itself to Greenland. And you start, joining the dots.
And that's one of the things that they put down in that initial peace plan. So I actually think it's progress that they're even talking at all, the Russians and the Ukrainians. I think it's progress that they're putting concrete peace plans on the table. But we knew that the Russians' first offer would be too much. We knew that they would ask for more than was reasonable to give. That's how negotiations often work. I'm not bothered by that. What would bother me is if we conclude that the Russians are not engaging in the negotiation in good faith. And if that happens, yeah, we're going to walk away. The president's going to say we're out of this thing.
He was asked whether it was time for the US to give more weapons to Ukraine, and his answer is we're going to walk away. So I think you can kiss goodbye to the US giving any more military assistance to Ukraine ever. They might sell some stuff, but they're certainly not going to be giving any, even if Russia are the worst faith of actors. So this is going against what Donald Trump himself said in the run-up to the election, that if Russia don't play ball, we'll come down heavy on them and give Ukraine all the weapons they need. That's what Trump said. He said that. And now it's no, when Russia don't play ball, we're going to walk away. So he's gone back on his word, Trump, as spoken through Vance here. And I think that is not good enough at all. It is not good enough.
And what that's going to mean fundamentally, I think, is that both Russia and Ukraine are going to be left to settle this thing without the advice and without the mediation of the United States. I don't think that's good for anybody. I don't think it's good for us. I don't think it's good for Russia or Ukraine. But we can only lead these guys to the well. We can't force them to drink. And that's what the president has done. And I do think we've had some diplomatic breakthroughs. Again, the fact the Russians are offering a peace plan at all, that's a breakthrough. The fact the Ukrainians are offering a concrete proposal, that's a breakthrough, but we've got to try to get these sides a little bit closer together to achieve a lasting peace. We're not there yet. We'll keep working on it until we decide that we...
Not there yet. We keep working on it. We might walk away, but well done for doing that in 24 hours, and even before the inauguration. Well done for that. So Zelenskyy had a conversation with Trump yesterday, and he said, we congratulated our peoples on Victory in Europe Day, the victory over Nazism. We discussed the need for further efforts for peace, steps that can be taken. Trump asked about the situation on the battlefield. I briefed him. Ukraine is ready for a 30-day ceasefire starting today. We expect Russia to agree to this proposal. I also confirmed that Ukraine is ready for negotiations in any format. Russia must show the seriousness of its intentions to end the war, starting with a complete and unconditional ceasefire. So again, Zelenskyy is very keen on this unconditional ceasefire, and he said that to Trump. President Trump confirmed that he wants to end this war, is ready to help, and supports the need for a ceasefire. We agreed on further contacts. Now, this is fascinating. So remember the recency bias that Trump has. Whoever the last person to speak to him was, that's what he regurgitates. So then we hear Trump calling for, wait for it, an unconditional ceasefire committed to securing peace between Ukraine and Russia. So he has a phone call to Zelenskyy. He goes, oh, yeah, good point. Oh, yeah. You want a 30-day ceasefire, which, Ukraine have been saying for the last couple of weeks. But when Zelenskyy says it in person to Trump, Trump then gets on the socials and then gets into his pressers and say, right, we want a 30-day ceasefire. US President Donald Trump called for a 30-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Trump expressed his hope for the ceasefire with both countries held accountable for direct negotiations. So here, Trump now echoes Ukraine's call for an unconditional ceasefire, says now reports, but avoids blaming Russia talks with both sides and stresses quick peace over accountability. Despite the shift in tone, his vague framing and past praise of Putin suggests he still leans neutral and not pro-Ukraine. I don't think he'll ever be pro-Ukraine. Donald, start effing pressuring Russia if you want to accomplish something. So this is what Donald Trump's statement was on Truth Social. Talks with Russia, Ukraine continue. The US calls for ideally a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Hopefully an acceptable ceasefire will be observed, and both countries will be held accountable for respecting the sanctity of these direct negotiations. If the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions. Well, okay. Thousands of young soldiers are dying on a weekly basis, and everybody should want it to stop. All caps. I do, and the United States of America does also. As president, I will stay committed to securing peace between Russia and Ukraine. Together with the Europeans, and a lasting peace it will be. The ceasefire must ultimately build toward a peace agreement. It can all be done very quickly, and I will be available on a moment's notice if my services are needed. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So that's what Trump said. Meanwhile, there's the Victory Day parade in Russia. That's all going to plan as far as the Russians are concerned, with Steven Seagal in attendance. Always great to see him and his hairline. Interesting. So H.I. Sutton here says, was expecting air raids to close this down. No, I never thought that would happen. Personally, I just think it's too much of a risk. The most you could have had drones that you sent towards Moscow, but you never planned on them getting to Moscow. But then the problem is you'll get a lot of, even if you plan them to hit targets maybe in Moscow Oblast, a military target, but then it makes all the air raids go off and makes the parade stop, you would have foreign dignitaries thinking those drones would have been going towards Moscow, like the city, the parade, and then going, if Xi Jinping feels that his life is in danger, then he's going to be super angry and help out Russia more. So I think it's no surprise that Ukrainians didn't do anything, and I wasn't expecting air raids to close that down at all, because then you got Serbia, Slovakia and China. They don't need any more excuse to help Russia even more, and they would use that. And then you've got Putin meeting North Korean generals. They would then go, right, we need to help Russia even more. So I no surprise that it's so far been a quiet day there. Putin has said Russia will remain an indestructible barrier to the supporters of Nazism, Russophobia and anti-Semitism. Yep, of course. Meanwhile, during a Victory Day parade, a banner appeared on the wall of the museum at Narva, Estonia. So this is facing directly towards Russia. Russia's across the river here, and it has all these big screens across the river showing Victory Day to the Estonians. The Estonians here putting up a massive banner saying Putler, war criminal. And, the sort of merging Hitler's and Putin's faces there. I love this as well. Don't know where that is, but that is a pretty good statue. Russia is a terrorist state, so it says on that big banner behind, and you won't get me disagreeing with that. Meanwhile, in Kiev, as mentioned, foreign ministers and diplomats from 35 countries and the Council of Europe are in Lviv. Foreign Minister that's the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, says they will discuss efforts to strengthen Ukraine and promote its accession to the EU. The visit began with tributes to heroes, and here you can see a number of people. That looks like Jean-Noël Barrot. That's Andriy Sybiha. That is David Lammy from the UK. I'm not sure of the others, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, so good stuff. Is this in Lviv? That looks like I've been there. So you will have seen video of me at that. That's a field of Mars in Lviv, and it's an incredibly moving place there. So it's really interesting to see all of these people at places where I've been. And, I was there with Pierre and Mark and Benny Pye and Dan and JR. We all had a very sort of emotional day there, actually. So tributes to the heroes who were fighting against Russia's aggression taking place there. Here we see foreign ministers, and that looks like, is that Kaja Kallas there as well? And that looks like Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister for Ukraine too. There's David Lammy and others. So that's good to see. and acts as a nice balance to the crappy victory parade in Moscow. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, we are still carrying out the Car for Ukraine Easter Paisanki fundraiser. We are at the moment closing in on Ukraine matters. We just need to get over that final. Oh, look, Laserpig has done a fundraiser and has fired himself into first place. So that's pretty impressive. I don't think we're gonna. We are aiming for 22,000. So we're about 4,150 away from that. And if you can help out with getting over the finish line, that would be amazing. Please follow the link below, atpgeo.com/donate. And you can add yourselves to the donor wall. I'm going to read out the last few. Some people don't leave their name, which is absolutely fine, of course. Anton Archin, I think. David Lewis, again. Thank you, David Lewis. Really, really kind. And that's these are some sizable contributions. Julian Roster contributed the other night. I put that through for him on the live feed. We've got Graham Baker, Ot Rakesig, and David Lewis again. There, so legend. Thank you, Tracy Astle, as I mentioned the other day, Derek Human, David Lewis again. So David Lewis, incredibly generous. Thank you. Super kind. Legend. You're definitely a legend in my eyes. Right, take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.